The sting wasn't the breakup itself. That had been a slow, painful bleed over months. The real gut-twisting agony was standing here under the crystal chandeliers of the Vanderbilt Grand Hall, watching him parade his new life as if she'd never been a part of it. Every condescending smile from her ex, Blake Caldwell, felt like a tiny paper cut on her soul. He stood there, arm draped around a woman who looked like she was born in couture, his voice booming about his latest acquisition for Caldwell Investment Group. And then he saw her. That predatory glint in his eyes told her everything. Everything. He was coming over not to be polite, but to gloat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She had to do something, anything, to wipe that smug look off his face. In a blind panic, her eyes darted through the crowd and landed on a tall, dark-haired man standing alone by the marble columns, his gaze fixed on a painting. He was an island of calm in a sea of noise. Without a second thought, she moved. Rowan Ashworth's feet moved before her brain could veto the utterly insane idea. Her career as a junior art historian for a modest but respected gallery meant she was supposed to be a wallflower at events like this, observing networking quietly, not making a scene. But the sight of Blake and his glossy new girlfriend Tiffany, bearing down on her like a pair of designer-clad sharks, sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic through her veins. Rowan, darling. Blake's voice was smooth, a polished veneer over a core of pure condescension. I almost didn't recognize you. You're looking, well. He let the word hang, the unspoken implication being, not as good as the woman currently attached to my arm. Tiffany offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Blake has told me so much about you. Rowan's own smile felt brittle, like a pane of glass about to shatter. All good things, I hope. Of course, Blake chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves. I was just telling Tiffany how you're still at that little gallery. It's sweet you have a passion. I, on the other hand, just closed the Kensington deal. A 9-figure play. But you wouldn't know about that world. That was it. That was the jab designed to put her in her place. The world of small passions versus his world of big money. Her world, which he had once pretended to admire, was now just a quaint little hobby in his rearview mirror. Her gaze flickered past his shoulder and found the stranger again. He was still there now, sipping a glass of what looked like whiskey, his suit a masterpiece of quiet tailoring. He radiated an aura of stillness and authority that was the complete antithesis of Blake's loud look-at-me energy. Do it, a reckless voice in her head screamed, wiped the smirk off his face. Her heart pounding, she took a deep breath, stepped forward, and did the unthinkable. She threaded her arm through the stranger's, her fingers finding and clasping his hand. The contact sent a surprising jolt of warmth through her. He was solid real. He turned his head slowly, his dark, intelligent eyes the color of rich espresso, widening in surprise. Rowan gave him a frantic, pleading look, then turned a dazzling, false smile on Blake. Blake, Tiffany, so lovely to see you. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you. This is... She trailed off, her mind a complete blank. The stranger didn't miss a beat. His hand, which had been passive in hers, gave her a gentle, reassuring squeeze. He shifted his stance, turning to face Blake, fully a subtle act of possession that made Rowan's breath catch. Dominic, he supplied his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to cut through the din of the gala. He extended his free hand to Blake, his gaze level and unreadable. A pleasure. Blake was momentarily thrown. He had expected a flustered, lonely Rowan. He hadn't expected Dominic. He took the offered hand, his own bravado seeming to shrink under the stranger's calm scrutiny. Blake Caldwell. And you are a friend of Rowan's, something like that? Dominic said, his lips curving into a faint, enigmatic smile. He turned his gaze to Rowan, and for a split second she saw not confusion but amusement dancing in their depths. It was as if they were sharing a private joke. Darling, you didn't tell me we'd be running into old acquaintances. The word darling, delivered in that smooth, confident tone, was a masterstroke. Rowan saw the flicker of shock, and dare she hope jealousy in Blake's eyes. Tiffany's perfect smile tightened at the edges. Rowan, emboldened, pressed her advantage. Oh, you know how it is. You can't avoid everyone from your past. She leaned her head slightly against Dominic's shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Dominic and I were just admiring the Rothko. He has such a fascinating perspective on late-period abstract expressionism. It was a gamble, a ridiculous highbrow bluff. What if this guy was a tech mogul who thought Rothko was a brand of hiking boots? But Dominic didn't hesitate. The juxtaposition of the maroon and the black is less about despair, as critics often claim, and more about the search for light within the void. He said, his gaze fixed on Blake. It's about potential. Something many people overlook when they're distracted by surface-level brightness. The comment landed with surgical precision. Blake, whose taste in art ran to gaudy sculptures of bulls and bears, had no response. He just blinked completely out of his depth. He had built his world on the tangible, on numbers, deals, and assets. This quiet, confident man was speaking a language he didn't understand, and in doing so, had effortlessly seized control of the entire situation. Blake cleared his throat, trying to recover. Right. Well, we should mingle. Good seeing you, Rowan. He practically dragged Tiffany away, his retreat far hastier than his arrogant approach. The moment they were out of earshot, Rowan felt the adrenaline begin to drain away, replaced by a tidal wave of mortification. She let go of the stranger's hand as if it were burning hot. Oh my God, she whispered, burying her face in her hands. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I just did that. You must think I'm a complete lunatic. She peeked through her fingers at him. He was watching her not with anger or annoyance, but with that same unnerving, amused expression. He took a sip of his whiskey. Well, he said, his voice laced with a humour that made her stomach do a little flip. It was certainly a more interesting conversation than the one I was just having about offshore tax havens. He looked at her, a genuine smile finally breaking through his composed facade. So, tell me, Rowan, what else should I know about my fascinating perspective on art? Rowan's cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the stuffy ballroom. I'm so sorry, she repeated, her voice muffled. I should go. I'll just disappear. You can tell everyone I was a figment of your imagination. And miss the rest of the show. Dominic's smile widened. He gestured towards the crowd, where Blake was now watching them from a distance, trying and failing to look nonchalant. Your ex looks like he's trying to decide whether to hire a private investigator or just throw his drink at me. I'd hate to spoil his evening. There was something about his unflappable demeanor that was incredibly calming. Instead of being angry at being used as a prop, he seemed genuinely entertained. This wasn't the reaction she had anticipated. He's not worth your time, Rowan mumbled, finally dropping her hands. He's an ego with a trust fund. The worst kind, Dominic agreed easily. They have the resources to be truly insufferable. He gestured with his glass. Since I'm already playing the part, may I get my... Darling, a drink? You look like you could use one. She found herself nodding, still slightly dazed. Champagne. Please. As he signaled a passing waiter with an almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, Rowan took a moment to truly look at him. He was handsome, yes, in a classic understated way. His dark hair was expertly cut, his jawline sharp, and his black tuxedo fit him perfectly. It wasn't a rental, it was the kind of suit that was probably worth more than her car. But it was his eyes that held her. They were observant, missing nothing, and held a depth that suggested a world of experiences she couldn't begin to imagine. He wore a simple, elegant watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe, she noted with her art historian's eye for detail, the only ostentatious thing about him, and even that was a mark of quiet taste, not loud wealth. The waiter arrived with 2 flutes of champagne, as if summoned by magic. Dominic handed one to her, his fingers brushing against hers. So Rowan, the art historian, he began, leaning against the marble column beside her. Tell me about us. How did we meet? I feel I should be prepared for when Mr. Caldwell circles back for round 2. A nervous laugh escaped her. Okay. Let's see. We met at the Sotheby's auction last month. You were bidding on the de Kooning. He raised an eyebrow. Did I win? No, she said, getting into the spirit of it. You were outbid by a Russian oligarch. You were very gracious in defeat. I was impressed. We struck up a conversation about the commodification of art and you asked me for my card. Resourceful and intellectual. I like it, he mused. And my profession, Rowan hesitated. He had an air of finance, but more old money than Blake's cutthroat world. You're in international investments, a family firm, based in Europe. Geneva, perhaps excellent. Vague, but respectable. It explains my accent, he said, and she realized for the first time that his perfect English was indeed tinged with a subtle, unplaceable European accent. They spent the next hour in their little bubble, the rest of the gala fading into a muted backdrop. He was an incredible conversationalist. He asked about her work not with the polite disinterest she was used to, but with genuine curiosity. He listened, truly listened, as she spoke about her passion for discovering forgotten female artists of the Impressionist movement. In return, he spoke of his travels, of his love for architecture, and of a feeling of being constrained by family expectations, a sentiment that resonated with her more than he could know. He never gave specifics, but he painted a picture of a life that was both privileged and restrictive. For the first time all night, she wasn't thinking about Blake. She was completely captivated by Dominic. The inevitable finally happened. Blake, his curiosity getting the better of him, reappeared this time alone. I hope I'm not interrupting. he said, his tone oily. You are, but I assume you're going to speak anyway, Dominic replied coolly, not moving an inch from Rowan's side. Blake ignored him, focusing on Rowan. I was just doing a little Googling. Dominic Geneva Investments. It's a pretty common name. Can't seem to find anything on you. Funny for a man who can afford a gala like this. He was fishing, trying to expose her lie. Rowan's heart sank. This was it. The charade was over. But Dominic simply smiled, a chillingly calm expression. That's because my family values privacy above all else. We don't have a flashy web presence like the Caldwell Investment Group. We find that the most significant wealth doesn't need to announce itself. He took a deliberate look at Blake's diamond-encrusted watch. It whispers. The comeback was so devastatingly effective that Blake was left speechless. He had built his identity on the trappings of wealth, and this stranger had just dismissed it all as loud new money desperation. Defeated, Blake muttered something about needing to find his girlfriend and vanished for good. Rowan turned to Dominic, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude. You are unbelievable. Thank you. You provided the script, he said, with a slight bow of his head. I just delivered my lines. The gala was winding down. People were beginning to retrieve their coats. A sense of reality began to creep back in. This fantasy was ending. Well, she said softly, a pang of disappointment hitting her. Thank you for being my fake Swiss investor boyfriend for the evening. You were very convincing. The pleasure was all mine, he said, his expression becoming serious. Rowan? He was interrupted by a man in a dark suit who approached and spoke quietly in his ear, in a language she didn't recognize. French, maybe? Or Italian? Dominic nodded, and the man retreated. I'm sorry I have to go, Dominic said, his gaze searching hers, but this doesn't have to be the end of the evening. He pulled a sleek black phone from his pocket. May I have your number? I'd like to continue our conversation about the commodification of art, perhaps over dinner. Her heart leapt. You would, I insist? She gave him her number, her fingers trembling slightly. He typed it in, then paused. My car is waiting out front, he said. Can I give you a ride home? It was a simple offer, but it felt like a gateway to another world. A world where men were witty and charming and defended your honor against your loathsome ex. A world she very much wanted to see more of. I'd like that, she said, a real genuine smile finally gracing her lips. I'd like that very much. The cool night air of New York was a welcome relief after the stuffy ballroom. As Rowan and Dominic stepped out from under the grand awning of the Vanderbilt Hall, the line of waiting town cars and taxis was a chaotic ballet of headlights and exhaust fumes. She expected him to point to a random Uber or a yellow cab. Instead, the man in the dark suit who had interrupted them, his name was Gregor. She learned, spoke into his sleeve, and a gleaming black Bentley Mulsanne detached itself from the curb and glided to a silent stop in front of them. It was the kind of car you only see in movies, impossibly long, impossibly sleek, its windows tinted to an impenetrable black. Gregor opened the rear door and Rowan froze. This wasn't the car of a private investor from Geneva. This was the car of a head of state. Is this yours? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic simply smiled and gestured for her to get in. My family, as I said, values privacy and security. The interior was a cocoon of soft cream-colored leather and polished burr walnut. It smelled of wealth, a scent she was beginning to associate with him. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them off from the sounds of the city. As the car pulled away, she noticed another black SUV, a Cadillac Escalade, fall in behind them. A security detail. Rowan's mind was racing, trying to assemble the puzzle pieces, the bespoke suit, the Patek Philippe, the effortless command of any situation, the Bentley, the bodyguard. Her story about a family firm in Geneva was starting to feel woefully inadequate. Dominic, she began, her voice a little shaky. Who are you? He looked at her, his expression softening under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Tonight, I was exactly who you needed me to be. That's not an answer, she countered, her curiosity overriding her awe. It's the truest one I can give you right now, he said gently. My life is complicated. That man you saw, Gregor, his primary job is to ensure it stays as uncomplicated as possible. Coming to a gala like this without him was a rare indulgence in normalcy for me. He wouldn't say more, and she didn't press. They drove in a comfortable silence through the glittering streets of Manhattan. When she gave him her address, a modest pre-war building in the West Village, he simply relayed it to the driver without a flicker of judgment. The Bentley was too large for her narrow street, so it stopped at the corner. Gregor was out in an instant, opening her door. Dominic got out with her. I live just up there, she said, pointing. Thank you again for everything. You were my knight in shining armor tonight. It was my honor, he said, his voice low. He took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he lifted it to his lips, his gaze holding hers. The gesture was so old-world, so impossibly gallant, that it made her heart flutter. I will call you tomorrow, Rowan Ashworth. He got back into the car, and the Bentley and its escort disappeared into the night, leaving her standing on the corner, feeling as though she had just woken from a very strange and wonderful dream. Back in her small book-filled apartment, she kicked off her heels and made a beeline for her laptop, her best friend Phoebe's frantic texts buzzing on her phone. Phoebe, OMG, I saw a pic on a gossip blog from the gala. Who is that guy you're with? You look like you're in a spy movie. Rowan ignored the text. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She didn't have much to go on. Dominic, Gregor, Bentley in European accent, it was a needle in a haystack. She searched for guests of the gala, for major foreign dignitaries in town, for anything. Nothing. Defeated, she was about to close her laptop when another text from Phoebe came through. This time it was just a link to a Forbes article. The headline made the air leave her lungs. Eldoria's enigmatic heir prince, Dominic Valerius, makes secret visit to New York to oversee sovereign wealth fund's new tech investment. Her hands trembled as she clicked the link. And there he was. The photo was from a state dinner, him in full royal regalia medals pinned to his chest, but there was no mistaking the face, the intense dark eyes, the calm, authoritative set of his jaw. The man she had grabbed on a whim, the man who had pretended to be her boyfriend, the man whose hand she had just held was a crown prince. The article detailed the wealth of the royal family of Eldoria, a small, obscenely wealthy principality tucked between the Alps known for its banking secrecy, tech innovation, and centuries of unbroken rule. The Valerius family was notoriously private, their fortune estimated in the hundreds of billions. Prince Dominic was the heir apparent educated at Oxford and MIT, known in financial circles as a brilliant but elusive strategist who managed his nation's vast wealth fund. He was the article noted one of the world's most powerful and unapproachable bachelors. Rowan stared at the screen, her mind a dizzying whirlwind of chandeliers, champagne, and a low baritone voice talking about Rothko. She had grabbed the hand of a stranger to annoy her ex. That stranger was a billionaire prince. Her phone buzzed again. It wasn't Phoebe this time. It was an unknown number. Her heart stopped. She knew with absolute certainty who it was. She answered, her hand shaking. "Hello, Rowan," the familiar, resonant voice said, sounding even more surreal through the phone. "I promised I would call. I hope I'm not too late." She could only manage one word. "Dominic." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft sigh. "Yes. Although I suspect you may have just learnt my full name." "Prince Dominic Valerius," Rowan said the name, feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "That's your full name?" There was another pause. "I apologize for the omission," he said, his tone laced with a sincerity that disarmed her. "My intention was not to deceive you. My life requires a certain level of discretion. When you approached me, I saw an opportunity for a few hours of anonymity." It was a selfish impulse. Selfish, Rowan laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "You saved me from total and complete humiliation. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I practically forced you into a lie." "A lie I enjoyed far more than I should have," he admitted, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Listen, Rowan, I know this is a lot to process. The headlines and titles, they rarely paint an accurate picture. The man you met tonight, the one who knows a little about art and dislikes boastful ex-boyfriends, that's me. The prince is just the job description." He sounded so normal, so grounded, that it was almost more disorienting than the revelation itself. "I still stand by my offer of dinner," he continued. "If you're willing. A real dinner. No charades. I'd like to get to know the brilliant art historian who isn't afraid to take a chance." Her logical brain was screaming at her to run. This was a world she didn't belong in, a world of protocols and paparazzi and expectations she couldn't possibly meet. But her heart, still fluttering from his chivalry and their easy connection, had other ideas. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." The date was unlike anything she could have imagined. He didn't take her to a flashy, Michelin-starred restaurant where they would be seen. Instead, the Bentley once again picked her up. This time, it took her to a private entrance of a soaring modern skyscraper in Midtown that she later learnt was the North American headquarters of the Eldorian Sovereign Wealth Fund. The elevator opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment. It was a duplex, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 180-degree view of the city, lights twinkling below. The space was decorated with a masterful blend of modern minimalism and priceless antiques. A genuine Giacometti sculpture stood in one corner, and a painting that looked suspiciously like a Kandinsky hung over the fireplace. Dominic was standing by the window, not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a simple grey cashmere sweater. He looked relaxed younger and impossibly handsome. "Welcome to my temporary home," he said with a warm smile. He hadn't arranged for a private chef, as she might have expected. Instead, laid out on the marble island in the open-plan kitchen were ingredients for pasta carbonara. "I hope you don't mind," he said a little sheepishly, "but cooking is one of the few things I can do for myself that feels normal. Gregor is a wonderful head of security, but a terrible food critic." For the next few hours, they chopped garlic, grated cheese, and drank a bottle of incredible red wine that he pulled from a temperature-controlled cellar. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her dream of one day curating her own major exhibition. He told her about the crushing weight of his duty, his passion for sustainable technology, the real reason for his trip to New York, and his frustration with the ceremonial aspects of his role. He spoke of Eldoria not as a fairy tale kingdom, but as a country, a business he was destined to run. He was burdened by its future, its economy, its people. She saw not a prince from a storybook, but a man, a brilliant, dedicated, and surprisingly lonely man. After dinner, they sat on a large sofa overlooking the city. The conversation slowed the space between them, filled with a comfortable intimacy. "I haven't had an evening like this in a very long time," he said, his voice quiet. "One where I wasn't being analysed or petitioned or measured against my father's legacy. And I haven't had one where my date turned out to be royalty," she quipped, trying to lighten the mood. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Does it bother you, my title?" She considered the question honestly. "It's intimidating. It's a lot. I'm just Rowan. I have student loans and an apartment with a leaky faucet. I like just Rowan," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Rowan who knows her Rothkos. Rowan who isn't afraid of her ex. Rowan who makes a prince feel like just a man named Dominic." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deepened as she responded. It was a kiss that held all the surprise and electricity of their first meeting, but it was underpinned by something new, a genuine burgeoning affection. It was breathless and heart-stopping, and felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. When they finally broke apart, they simply looked at each other, the glittering city lights their only witness. In that moment, he wasn't a prince, and she wasn't a commoner. They were just two people on a first date who had found something unexpected in a crowded room. But as Rowan looked out at the vast, sprawling city below, a sliver of fear pierced her bubble of happiness. A life lived in penthouses and private jets was a life lived under a microscope, and she had a feeling their quiet, perfect evening was just the calm before a very public storm. The storm broke 2 days later. Rowan was at her desk at the gallery trying to focus on cataloguing a new collection of lithographs when Phoebe called, her voice an octave higher than usual. "Turn on your computer, go to any major news site, now." With a sense of dread, Rowan did as she was told. Her own face stared back at her. A paparazzi photographer hidden somewhere outside the Vanderbilt Hall had caught them. It was a single, perfect shot. Dominic was looking down at her, a small private smile on his face while she was looking up at him, her hand tucked securely in his. The headline was explosive: "Europe's most eligible prince and his mystery woman inside Dominic Valerius's secret New York romance." The article was a mix of fact and wild speculation. It correctly identified her as Rowan Ashworth, an art historian, but it painted her as a cunning social climber who had ensnared the prince. They rehashed every detail of her life they could find online: her college, her first job, even a picture from her old public social media profile. Blake's name was mentioned as her recent ex, with an anonymous source who sounded suspiciously like Blake himself, quoted as saying Rowan was always ambitious. Her world tilted on its axis. Her phone began to buzz incessantly with calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters. By lunchtime, a news van was parked across the street from her apartment building, and another was outside her office. She was trapped. Dominic called, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Rowan, I am so sorry. I have my team working on this. We're trying to kill the story, but it's already everywhere." "Are you all right? I don't know," she stammered, watching through the blinds as a photographer tried to get a shot of her through the gallery window. "Dominic, I can't leave my office. Stay there. Gregor is on his way to you. He'll bring you to me. You're not safe on your own." The calm authority in his voice was the only thing keeping her from completely falling apart. An hour later, the imposing figure of Gregor appeared at the gallery's back entrance. He shielded her with his own body, guiding her into the back of a black SUV that was not the Bentley, but a far more discreet bulletproof-looking vehicle. The short drive to Dominic's building was a blur of flashes as photographers swarmed the car. She found Dominic pacing in his penthouse, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly in Eldorian. He ended the call the moment he saw her and rushed to her side, pulling her into a hug. "This is my fault," he said, his voice rough with frustration. "I underestimated the media's reach here. I put you in this position." "It's not your fault," she said, her voice muffled against his sweater. "I'm the one who grabbed your hand. And I'm the one who should have protected you from the consequences," he countered. The next few days were a blur. Rowan stayed with Dominic in the gilded cage of his penthouse. His staff was discreet and kind, bringing her anything she needed, but she felt like a prisoner. She couldn't go to work, couldn't go for a walk, couldn't see her friends. Her life had been hijacked. The real trouble, however, arrived not in a news van, but in a private jet from Eldoria. Dominic was in a meeting in the building's lower-level offices when his chief of staff, a severe-looking man named Frederick, announced a visitor. "Your Highness, Her Grace Duchess, Genevieve Delacour has arrived." Rowan, who was curled up on the sofa trying to read, looked up. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She remembered seeing it in one of the articles about Dominic, a name often linked with his, a suitable match from a neighbouring aristocratic family. Genevieve Delacour was everything Rowan wasn't. She was tall, blonde, and exuded an air of effortless old-world elegance. Her Chanel suit was flawless, her smile perfectly polite, yet her eyes were as cold and sharp as chips of ice. She appraised Rowan from head to toe in a single dismissive glance. "So Genevieve," said her voice, a silken purr with a distinct French accent, "you must be the little art historian, the American distraction." Rowan stood up, refusing to be intimidated. "And you must be the Duchess. It's a pleasure." "Is it?" Genevieve tilted her head. "You see, I've known Dominic my whole life. Our families are intertwined. We understand the world we live in. A world of duty, of lineage, of appropriate alliances." She took a step closer. "He has these little flights of fancy. He indulges in the fantasy of a normal life, but he always comes back to reality. And the reality is, a girl like you has no place in his world." "That's for Dominic to decide, isn't it?" Rowan said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Oh, my dear," the Duchess laughed, a light tinkling sound that held no warmth. "It was decided for him the day he was born. He is a prince, he will be a king, and kings do not marry gallery assistants. They marry women who can help them rule." Just then, the elevator doors opened and Dominic walked in. He stopped short, his face hardening when he saw Genevieve. "Genevieve, this is an unexpected surprise," he said, his tone icy. "Dominic, darling," she said, her entire demeanor changing into one of warm affection. She glided over to him and kissed him on both cheeks. "My father was worried." "The Royal Council is in an uproar over these photos. I came to see the situation for myself, and to remind you of your obligations." She cast a pointed look at Rowan. "Specifically, the upcoming Eldorian Prosperity Gala. Gala in Geneva. Our families are co-hosting, remember. Your attendance is not optional, and you will of course need an appropriate partner on your arm." The threat was clear. Genevieve wasn't just a rival. She was the embodiment of his duty, the physical representation of the life he was supposed to lead. And she had just declared war on Rowan. The arrival of Duchess Genevieve Delacour shifted the atmosphere in the penthouse from a sanctuary to a battleground. She didn't leave. Instead, she took up residence in a guest suite in Dominic's building, a constant, impeccably dressed reminder of the world that existed outside their bubble. She would join them for breakfast, making pointed remarks about Eldorian politics that Rowan couldn't understand, or comment on Rowan's simple attire with a backhanded compliment like, "Oh, how lovely." So comfortable. Dominic's demeanor changed. He became tense, the easygoing charm he'd shown Rowan replaced by the formal, guarded posture of a prince. He was constantly on calls with his father, the king, and with the Royal Council. The pressure from his home country was immense. The scandal of him being photographed with a commoner was seen as a diplomatic liability, jeopardizing delicate trade negotiations he was there to finalize. The final straw came from an unlikely source, Blake Caldwell. Seeing his chance for the ultimate revenge, he had sold an exclusive story to a sleazy British tabloid. The headline was plastered everywhere. "Prince's new girl is a gold-digging ex who dumped me for a bigger payday," says devastated financier. The article was filled with twisted half-truths and outright lies. Blake painted himself as the hard-working victim, and Rowan as a manipulative schemer who had always been obsessed with status and money. He even included private, out-of-context text messages from their relationship to prove his point. Rowan felt sick as she read it. It was character assassination on a global scale. This wasn't just a New York gossip story anymore. It was an international incident. That evening, the tension between her and Dominic finally snapped. My father called me. He set his back to her as he stared out at the city. The council is demanding I issue a formal statement denouncing the relationship as a fabrication by the media. They want me to appear at the Prosperity Gala in Geneva with Genevieve to present a united front. Rowan's heart plummeted. And what did you say? What can I say? He shot back, turning to face her, his eyes filled with a frustration she had never seen before. My entire life has been a series of obligations. This deal I'm working on will fund our country's healthcare system for the next decade. The alliance with Genevieve's family secures a critical trade route. These are not small things, Rowan. This is the weight of an entire nation. And what about me? She asked, her voice small but firm. Am I just a complication to be managed? Am I the American distraction Genevieve called me? Of course not, he said, running a hand through his hair in agitation. But you don't understand what this world is like. You saw what Blake did. This is just the beginning. They will dig into every corner of your life, your family's life. They will twist everything you've ever done. Are you prepared for that? Am I selfish enough to ask you to endure that? His words were meant to protect her, but they felt like a dismissal. It felt like he was telling her she wasn't strong enough, that she didn't belong. The fairy tale was dissolving into a nightmare. So that's it, she said, tears welling in her eyes. You're just going to go to Geneva with her and pretend I never existed. I don't know what I'm going to do. He finally exploded, his voice echoing in the vast, silent apartment. The raw anguish in his tone shocked them both into silence. The chasm between them felt a mile wide. He was a prince burdened by a crown she couldn't see, and she was just a girl from Ohio caught in the gears of a machine she couldn't comprehend. Maybe Genevieve was right, Rowan whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. Maybe I have no place here. Without another word, she walked into the bedroom and began to pack her small bag. She couldn't stay here, not like this. She couldn't be the secret, the problem, the scandal that needed to be managed. Dominic stood frozen in the living room, making no move to stop her. His silence was the most painful answer of all. She called the only person she could trust. Phoebe, she said, her voice breaking. Can you come and get me? I'm coming home. Gregor, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes filled with something akin to pity, escorted her to the service elevator. He didn't take her out the front where the press still lingered, but through a labyrinthine series of underground tunnels that connected to a parking garage 2 blocks away. As she stepped into Phoebe's beat-up Honda, leaving the world of black SUVs and bodyguards behind, she felt a profound, heart-wrenching sense of loss. She hadn't just lost a prince, she had lost Dominic, and she wasn't sure which one hurt more. The 2 days that followed were a study in grey, muted tones, a stark contrast to the vibrant, chaotic world she had just fled. Back in her own apartment, the city's familiar symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the subway beneath the floorboards offered no comfort. It only amplified the profound silence that had taken root in her life. The leaky faucet in her bathroom, once a minor quirky annoyance, now dripped with a torturous metronomic rhythm, each drop a mocking echo of the silent, opulent luxury she had left behind. She had tried to reclaim her old life, but it no longer fit. At the gallery, her colleagues treated her with a mixture of awe and pity, whispering when they thought she wasn't looking. Online, she was no longer Rowan Ashworth art historian. She was a hashtag, a meme, a subject of vicious debate on gossip forums. She made the mistake of reading the comments, once scrolling through a torrent of anonymous cruelty that painted her as a conniving gold digger, a homewrecker, a fool. Blake's poison had seeped into the global consciousness, and his carefully crafted narrative had become her public identity. Every news alert on her phone was a fresh jolt of anxiety. The world's media had pivoted its massive, unblinking eye toward the upcoming Eldorian Prosperity Gala in Geneva. It was the only story that mattered. Speculation was rampant, presented as fact. Would Prince Dominic Valerius finally formalize his alliance with Duchess Genevieve de la Cour? Would he use the platform to address the embarrassing scandal of the American art historian Rowan had been demoted from a person to a problem, a footnote in the grand unfolding narrative of a prince and his destiny? She felt utterly broken. In this brutal, high-stakes game, she had been a pawn easily sacrificed. Blake had gotten his revenge. Genevieve had reclaimed her position. The crown with its centuries of unyielding power had won. She had been a fool, a ridiculous, naive fool, to believe that a spontaneous, desperate act in a ballroom could lead to anything other than this, a shattered heart and a ruined reputation. On the 3rd morning, as she sat nursing a cold cup of coffee, the buzzer to her apartment shrieked. It was a special courier with a package, a long, flat box from an address she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was it a subpoena, a cease and desist from the royal family's lawyers? With trembling hands, she signed for it and brought it inside, laying it on her small kitchen table as if it were a bomb. She sliced the tape carefully. Inside, nestled in layers of black tissue paper, was a dress. It wasn't a princess gown of tulle and glitter, but a stunning, sophisticated sheath of navy blue silk, its cut a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a garment that spoke of quiet confidence and unshakable grace. Tucked into its folds was a small, heavy, cream-colored envelope, the paper so fine it felt like fabric against her skin. Her name was written on the front in a familiar, elegant script that made her heart ache. With a deep breath, she broke the wax seal. Inside was not a letter filled with apologies or explanations, but a plane ticket. First class, on a direct flight to Geneva, departing that evening. And beneath it, a single, thick card. The message was short, the ink a dark, decisive blue. It read, "I once told you that the Rothko was about the search for light within the void. I've been living in the void. Be my light, please." The card fell from her numb fingers. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow, bypassing her cynical, wounded mind and hitting her directly in the soul, he remembered. In the midst of the chaos, the council meetings, the international pressure, he remembered their quiet conversation about art. He wasn't summoning her or commanding her. He was admitting his own darkness and asking for her, specifically her, to be his light. It wasn't a fairy tale proposal. It was a plea from a man drowning in the gilded cage he'd been born into. Tears, hot and immediate, streamed down her face, blurring the elegant script. This was the bravest, most terrifying choice of her life. Her logical brain, the part of her that was now scarred and cynical, screamed at her to tear the ticket to shreds, to protect herself, to lock the door and let the world rage outside. This path only led to more pain, more public humiliation. She couldn't possibly win against a duchess and a king and centuries of tradition, but her heart, the foolish, resilient part of her that had soared in his presence, knew she had to go. She looked around her small, safe apartment at the life she had fought so hard to build and realized that hiding here wasn't living. It was a slow surrender. She could either accept the role the world had assigned her, the disgraced ex, the prince's fleeting mistake, or she could fly into the heart of the storm and demand a different ending. Not for the prince, but for Dominic, and for herself. The flight was a surreal transition between worlds. As the plane climbed above the clouds, leaving the grit of New York City behind, Rowan felt suspended between her past and an unknowable future. She was an imposter in the plush first-class cabin, a girl from Ohio, sipping champagne at 30,000 feet, flying toward a destiny she hadn't chosen but could no longer run from. When she landed in Geneva, the machinery of Dominic's world enveloped her. She was met not by Gregor, but by a discreet, sharp-eyed female aide named Anja, who whisked her through a private diplomatic channel, bypassing the clamoring press she'd seen on the news. She was taken to a sprawling suite at the historic Hotel Beau Rivage, the very same one where the gala was being held. The suite's windows opened onto a breathtaking view of Lake Geneva, the water shimmering under a sky the color of amethyst. The navy blue dress was hanging in the wardrobe, waiting. As a quiet professional team helped with her hair and makeup, she stared at her reflection. A stranger stared back, a woman of impossible poise draped in silk, her eyes betraying the terror churning within. She wasn't just putting on a dress, she was putting on armor for the battle to come. A soft knock came at the suite door. It was Gregor, his stoic face betraying nothing. "Ms. Ashworth, His Highness is ready." He led her through a quiet, carpeted service corridor, a secret artery running through the heart of the Grand Hotel. He stopped before a set of mahogany doors, opening one to a small private antechamber. And there he was. Dominic stood by a tall window, dressed in a flawless black tuxedo, adorned with a single elegant royal insignia pinned to his lapel. He looked every inch the crown prince, a figure of immense power and heritage, but when he turned and saw her, the regal facade dissolved, and he was just Dominic. His breath hitched, and his eyes, dark and intense, were filled with a raw, vulnerable emotion that mirrored her own. "Rowan," he whispered the name a prayer. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands, his grip warm and firm. "You came." "You asked," she replied, her voice shaky but clear. "I know what I put you through," he said, his gaze searching hers, desperate to make her understand. "These last few days, I let the noise, the duty, the fear win. I listened to Frederick, to my father, to centuries of advice that said a man in my position cannot afford to have a heart. I pushed you away to protect you, but all I did was hurt us both. That was cowardice, not protection. The moment you left the silence in that apartment, it wasn't peace. It was the void I told you about. I made a choice. It is my life, my heart, and my crown to give. I will not let a council or ancient protocols dictate who I love." From beyond the door, they could hear the muted roar of the gala and the staccato explosions of camera flashes. An amplified voice was beginning the formal introductions. Dominic, a sharp voice called from the hallway. It was his chief of staff, Frederick. "They are announcing you. The Duchess is waiting. Dominic's focus never wavered from Rowan. Frederick, send the Duchess in, please. A moment later, Genevieve Delacour swept into the room, a vision in diamond-white satin, her posture radiating triumphant condescension. She stopped dead when she saw Rowan, her perfectly polite smile faltering, replaced by a flash of pure disbelief. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Dominic gently released Rowan's hand and turned to face the Duchess, his bearing no longer tense or conflicted, but imbued with the calm, unshakable authority of a future king. "Genevieve," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "thank you for coming. Your presence tonight is greatly appreciated by our families. However, your services as my partner this evening will not be required. I already have one." He turned back to Rowan, his eyes alight with love and resolve. He held out his arm, a simple gesture that was both a question and a promise. "Rowan Ashworth, will you do me the honour of accompanying me tonight?" Genevieve's face was a mask of cold fury. "You will regret this, Dominic. This is a diplomatic insult. The king will not stand for it. My father will learn to accept the woman I choose," Dominic said, his voice unwavering. "Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Rowan to the grand doors, their footsteps echoing on the parquet floor. The announcer's voice boomed from the ballroom, magnified and momentous. "Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Dominic Valerius of Eldoria." The doors swung open. 1,000 camera flashes went off at once, a blinding, violent wall of light. The sound was a deafening roar. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, Rowan faltered, her courage threatening to evaporate. Then she felt Dominic's hand squeeze hers, a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, his voice for her alone amidst the chaos. Just a man and a woman going to a party. She looked up at him, at the man who had seen her at her most desperate and her most broken, the man who had crossed an ocean and defied a kingdom for her. She saw the unwavering love and conviction in his eyes and found her strength. A real, radiant smile bloomed on her face. Together they stepped into the light. It wasn't a happily ever after, she knew. It was the beginning of a much harder, more complicated chapter. But as she stood by his side, facing the world, not as a prince's scandalous secret, but as his undeniable choice, she knew one thing for certain. He was hers, and she was his, and their real story was just beginning. And so a desperate, impulsive act born from heartbreak in a New York ballroom became a choice that would echo in the royal courts of Europe. Rowan's journey wasn't about being rescued by a prince. It was about finding the strength to walk into his world on her own terms, to be his partner, not his prize. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most unpredictable moments, the ones where we feel most lost, are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. It proves that true love isn't about titles or wealth or expectations, but about choosing to stand together hand in hand and face the blinding lights of the world. If you were captivated by Rowan and Dominic's incredible story of chance, love, and courage, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good real-life fairy tale, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.
The piercing, sterile smell of the hospital, the rhythmic, urgent beep of a heart monitor. For most, this is the soundtrack to a miracle. But for Vivian, it was the soundtrack to the most profound betrayal of her life. As a wave of agony seized her body, the only hand she had to squeeze was her own. The leather chair beside her, the one her husband Damien was supposed to be in, sat cold and empty. Her calls went to voicemail, each unanswered ring a fresh stab to her heart. She was about to bring their son into the world, but she had never felt more alone. Where was her millionaire husband? He was miles away, toasting champagne with his mistress, oblivious to the fact that his wife's world and the empire he'd built were about to come crashing down. The pain was a living thing. It coiled in Vivian Rossi's abdomen, a white-hot serpent of pressure and fire, before radiating through her entire being. She gasped, her knuckles turning white, as she gripped the cold metal bedrail of the delivery suite at St. Jude's Medical Center. The room, painted in a sterile, calming blue, felt like a quai souche. The heart monitor beeped a frantic rhythm, a counterpoint to the slow, agonizing tick of the clock on the wall. 8:14 p.m. "You're doing great, Vivian. Just breathe with me now." A kind-faced nurse named Mary said, her voice a soothing balm on Vivian's frayed nerves. deep breath in and out slowly. Vivian tried, but the breath hitched in her throat, turning into a sob. It wasn't just the physical pain that was tearing her apart. It was the vast, echoing emptiness of the room. It was the sight of the plush leather visitor's chair, the one Damien had insisted they bring from his office for maximum comfort, sitting vacant. He was supposed to be here. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sterile reality and summon his face. Not the recent version of Damien Sterling, the one whose eyes were always glued to his phone, whose smiles didn't quite reach them, whose excuses about late-night board meetings and emergency client dinners had become a nightly occurrence. No, she tried to remember the Damien she had fallen in love with 5 years ago, the charismatic real estate magnate who had swept her off her feet, an up-and-coming architect with more dreams than money. He had seen her sketches for a community center and declared her a genius. He had pursued her with a relentless, intoxicating passion that made her feel like the only woman in the world. "We're a team, Izzy," he'd whispered to her on their wedding night, their penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering city lights. "Sterling and Rossi. We'll build an empire, and then we'll build a family to fill it." Now their empire felt like his prison, and she was just a forgotten inmate. Her phone lay on the bedside table, a dark, silent rectangle. She had tried calling him a dozen times since her water broke that afternoon. The first few calls rang endlessly before clicking over to his polished professional voicemail. "You've reached Damien Sterling. I'm currently unavailable." The last 8 had gone straight to that same damned message. His phone was off. Or he was ignoring her. The latter felt like a shard of glass, twisting in her gut. "Any luck reaching your husband, honey?" Mary asked gently, adjusting the fetal monitor strap on Vivian's belly. Vivian shook her head, a single hot tear escaping her eye and tracing a path through the sweat on her temple. He had a crucial deal closing in San Francisco. A last-minute flight. He promised he'd be on the first plane back. He swore he wouldn't miss it. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She was defending him out of habit, but the defense felt hollow even to her own ears. Another contraction hit more powerful than the last. Vivian cried out a raw, primal sound that was part pain, part despair. In that moment of blinding agony, she wasn't Mrs. Vivian Sterling, wife of a millionaire resident of a glass-walled palace in the sky. She was just a woman, terrified and utterly alone, about to face the biggest moment of her life, with nothing but the professional kindness of strangers. Hours bled into one another. The world outside the hermetically sealed room ceased to exist. There was only the relentless cycle of pain, the rhythmic beeping, and the gaping void left by Damien's absence. Through the haze of exhaustion and agony memories flickered Damien assembling the crib. His brow furrowed in concentration, Damien pressing his ear to her swollen belly, a rare, genuine smile on his face as the baby kicked. "He's got a right hook like his old man," he'd joked. Where was that man now? At 2:47 a.m., after a final desperate push that felt like it was tearing her soul from her body, her son was born. A cascade of relief love and utter exhaustion washed over her as the doctor placed the wailing, beautiful baby on her chest. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a thatch of dark hair, just like Damien's. She sobbed this time, with a joy so fierce it hurt. "Leo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Leo Michael Sterling." As the nurses cleaned her up and settled her and Leo into the recovery room, a sliver of hope remained. Maybe Damien's plane was delayed. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he would burst through the door any second, breathless and apologetic, his eyes lighting up at the sight of his son. The door finally opened at 6:15 a.m. Damien stood there, his custom-tailored suit looking impossibly crisp, not a hair out of place. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else, something floral and distinctly feminine. There was no look of frantic worry on his face, no disheveled panic from a mad dash through the airport. He looked merely inconvenienced. "Izzy," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I am so sorry. The deal went into extra innings. We were at the negotiating table all night. My phone died. I came as soon as I could." Vivian stared at him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She looked at his perfectly knotted silk tie, his polished shoes, and the faint, almost invisible smudge of shimmery pink lipstick on the collar of his white shirt. She looked at the man who had missed the birth of his own son for a deal. She held Leo closer, turning her face away so he wouldn't see the fresh tears. The deal, she repeated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Right. I'm glad you could close it, Damien." He moved closer, peering at the baby in her arms with a detached curiosity. "So that's him, huh? He's small." Vivian didn't answer. She just looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son, a silent vow forming in her heart. She had brought him into this world alone, and if she had to, she would raise him alone too. The cold, empty chair from the delivery room was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol. It was the beginning of the end. The first few weeks home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the overwhelming primal love Vivian felt for Leo. Their penthouse apartment, which had once felt like a symbol of their success, now felt like a gilded cage. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but all Vivian could see was her own reflection, a tired, pale woman in a milk-stained robe, her architectural ambitions gathering dust along with Damien's untouched family photo albums. Damien played the part of the doting new father, but only when an audience was present. For his parents' visit, he held Leo with practiced ease, boasting about his strong grip. When his business partner, Nathan Chen, came over with a gift, Damien spoke of legacy and building an empire for his heir. But when they were alone, the performance stopped. The nights were Vivian's domain. Damien slept in the guest room, citing the need to be sharp for morning meetings. His excuse was that Leo's crying would disrupt his concentration. The truth, Vivian knew, was a chasm widening between them so vast that a baby's cry couldn't possibly cross it. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now his constant companion, always screen down or in his pocket. He took calls on the terrace, his voice a low, intimate murmur carried away by the wind. The late nights became more frequent, the excuses more elaborate. Networking dinners, investor calls with Dubai site inspections that ran late. Vivian, consumed by the demands of a newborn, tried to ignore the warning signs. She told herself it was the stress of his work, the pressure of his new multi-billion-dollar waterfront development project. She wanted to believe the man she married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of ambition and arrogance. The first crack in her denial appeared on a Tuesday morning. Damien had left early for a breakfast meeting. Vivian was sorting laundry when his tablet, which was synced to his phone, chimed with a notification on the nightstand. She glanced over. It was a calendar alert. Anniversary dinner, S8 p.m. at Le Ciel. Vivian's blood ran cold. Their anniversary was in October. This was August. And who was Say? Her mind raced. Sarah Samantha. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. Le Ciel was the most exclusive romantic restaurant in the city, with a 6-month waiting list. He had told her he was having dinner with a concrete supplier from Chicago. Her hand trembled as she picked up the tablet. It was unlocked. With a heart hammering against her ribs, she opened his messages. She didn't have to scroll far. A conversation with a contact named simply S was pinned to the top. The profile picture was of a sleek black swan logo, not a person. The messages were a dagger to the heart. Can't wait for tonight, my love. 1 year since you walked into my gallery and changed my life. Damien. The feeling is mutual. Tonight we celebrate. Wear the red dress. S. The one you like, Damien. The one I like to take off you. S. Naughty. Don't be late. I have a surprise for you. Damien. I'll be there. I have to deal with something at home first. But my evening is all yours. Deal with something at home. The phrase echoed in the silent room. Was she the something? A chore to be managed before his real life began. Vivian sank onto the bed, the tablet slipping from her numb fingers. It wasn't a fling. It was a 1-year anniversary. He was living a completely separate life, celebrating milestones with another woman, while she was at home pregnant with his child waiting for him. The lipstick stain on his collar from the night Leo was born flashed in her mind. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He hadn't been in San Francisco. He had been with her. He had chosen his mistress over the birth of his own son. Rage, cold and pure, surged through her, replacing the shock. She thought of calling him, of screaming down the phone, of shattering the pristine, minimalist decor of their perfect apartment. But what good would that do? He would deny it. He would gaslight her. Call her hormonal and crazy, twist her own words until she doubted her sanity. He was a master of control and manipulation. No. A screaming match was what he would expect. It was a fire he knew how to extinguish. She needed something else. She needed proof. She needed a plan. That evening, when Damien came home, he was carrying a small, elegant bouquet of white lilies. For you, he said, kissing her cheek. The gesture was so hollow it was insulting. Sorry I'm late. The meeting ran over. Vivian forced a smile, her heart a block of ice. They're beautiful, thank you. How was your dinner with the supplier? Productive, he said, loosening his tie. Boring stuff. Concrete tariffs, logistics. You'd have been bored to tears. She watched him, marveling at the ease with which he lied. He was a perfect stranger, living in her home, sleeping in her guest room, fathering her child. The man she married was gone, replaced by this polished, empty shell. Later that night, after Damien had retreated to the guest room, Vivian crept into his home office. She had always respected his privacy, but privacy was a privilege for the trustworthy. She turned on his desktop computer. Password protected, of course. She tried their anniversary. No, his birthday. No, Leo's birthday. On a whim, she typed in the name of his first company, the one he'd started from nothing, Apex. Access granted. Her breath caught. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She opened his browser history, her hands shaking. There were links to luxury jewelers' pages for Cartier and Tiffany's. Recent searches included private jet charter to Monaco and 5-star resorts in Bali. Then she found what she was looking for, a link to an art gallery. Galerie Dubois. The logo was the same sleek black swan from the messaging app. She clicked on the About Us page. And there she was. The owner, Serafina Dubois. She was stunning in an angular, severe way, high cheekbones, raven black hair, cut in a sharp bob, intelligent, calculating eyes. She was everything Vivian wasn't. She was polished, powerful, and unencumbered by the beautiful, messy reality of motherhood. Vivian scrolled through the gallery's event photos, and then she saw it. A picture from a charity gala 2 months prior. Damien was on the far left of the photo, but his attention was entirely focused on the woman next to him, Serafina. He was laughing, his head tilted towards her, his hand resting on the small of her back with an intimacy that was unmistakable. They looked like a couple, a power couple. Vivian stared at the photo until the faces blurred through her tears. The glass house Damien had built for them was a sham. The foundations were rotten, and the cracks were finally starting to show. And Vivian knew with a terrifying certainty that she had to be the one to bring it all crashing down before it buried her and Leo alive. The next few days were an exercise in masterful acting for Vivian. She played the part of the devoted, if slightly overwhelmed, new mother. She smiled when Damien held Leo. She asked about his day. She feigned belief in his increasingly flimsy excuses for his absences. Inside, she was a coiled spring of fury and resolve. The grief was still there, a raw wound in her chest, but it was being cauterized by a burning need for truth and justice. Her first call was to her best friend, Chloe Martinez. They had been inseparable since college, and Chloe, now a razor-sharp litigator at a top family law firm, was the one person Vivian knew she could trust implicitly. Chloe, I need you. Vivian said, her voice barely a whisper, as she rocked Leo's bassinet with her foot. Not as a friend. I need you as a lawyer. An hour later, Chloe was sitting in Vivian's kitchen, a sleek leather briefcase on the table next to a half-empty baby bottle. Chloe's sharp, intelligent eyes scanned Vivian's face with concern. Izzy, talk to me. What's going on? You look like you haven't slept in a year. With trembling hands, Vivian slid Damien's tablet across the marble countertop, open to the messages with S. Chloe read them, her expression shifting from concern to a cold, professional fury. She scrolled, her jaw tightening with every flirtatious exchange, every shared secret, every plan for a clandestine meeting. When she finally looked up, her voice was low and dangerous. The son of a bitch. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Vivian finally let the dam break. The whole story poured out of her, the empty chair in the delivery room, the lipstick stain, the fake business trips, the anniversary dinner, the Galerie Dubois. Chloe listened patiently, her expression hardening into a mask of legal steel. Okay, she said, when Vivian finished, her voice firm. Okay, Izzy. The first thing you need to understand is that you are not going to be a victim in this. We are going to be smart. We are going to be strategic. And we are going to be prepared. No screaming matches. No emotional confrontations. Not yet. Right now, we are on a fact-finding mission. We need irrefutable proof, not just of the affair, but of its scope and duration. Over the next week, guided by Chloe's strategic mind, Vivian transformed from a heartbroken wife into a private investigator in her own home. It was a dangerous, nerve-wracking game. She had to seize small windows of opportunity when Damien was in the shower or on a genuine business call. She started with finances. Chloe had advised her to look for unusual expenditures. Using the Apex password, she gained access to his personal credit card statements. It was all there laid out in cold, hard numbers. Weekly charges at five-star hotels, always for a day rate. Thousands of dollars spent at Cartier last month, a diamond bracelet, the invoice revealed. Extravagant dinners at Le Ciel and other restaurants he'd claimed were for business, charged on nights he was supposedly working late. There were charges from a high-end lingerie boutique and regular payments to a luxury car service. The most damning discovery was a recurring monthly payment of $25,000 to a holding company she didn't recognize, Dubois Holdings, LLC. It was a direct financial link. He wasn't just wining and dining his mistress, he was funding her. The emotional betrayal was agonizing, but the financial evidence was solid gold. "This isn't just an affair," Izzy Chloe said, looking over the printouts Vivian had discreetly made. "This is a pattern of dissipation of marital assets. He's actively spending your shared wealth on this woman. This changes everything." The next step was to get visual confirmation. Chloe was adamant. A judge can explain away credit card bills. It's a lot harder to explain away a photograph. Chloe hired a private investigator, a discreet professional named Frank, a former police detective with a knack for blending into the background. Vivian provided Frank with Damien's schedule, which she pieced together from his calendar and overheard calls. The target was a business conference Damien was supposedly attending downtown for 2 days. The waiting was torturous. Vivian felt sick with anxiety every time her phone buzzed. She tried to focus on Leo, on his gummy smiles and tiny grasping fingers. He was her anchor, her reason for pushing through this nightmare. The email from Frank arrived on the second day. The subject line was simple: "File attached." Vivian's hand shook as she clicked it open. There were a dozen photographs. The first few showed Damien checking into the Four Seasons Hotel alone. But the next one showed Serafina Dubois arriving 20 minutes later, walking into the same hotel. Then came the money shot, a long lens photo taken from across the street, looking into the hotel's exclusive bar. Damien and Serafina were seated at a secluded table, heads close together. Damien was holding her hand across the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles. They weren't talking business. They were looking at each other with an intimacy that made Vivian's stomach churn. The final photo was of them waiting for an elevator. His arm wrapped possessively around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. This was it. The irrefutable, soul-crushing proof. Her husband's double life unveiled in a series of high-resolution images. She saw a man she barely recognized, relaxed, happy, and completely enthralled by another woman. He had never looked at her that way, not even at the beginning. She closed the laptop, a cold, calm resolve settling over her. Chloe was right. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was about survival. This was about securing a future for Leo, a future that Damien was actively trying to give to someone else. That night, Damien came home feigning exhaustion from the conference. It was brutal, Izzy. Back-to-back seminars on zoning regulations. You wouldn't believe how dry it was, he said, kissing the top of her head. Vivian looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady. The actress in her delivered the performance of a lifetime. Poor baby. She cooed, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Why don't you go take a long shower? I'll order your favorite takeout. You deserve to relax. As he walked away, Vivian looked at his back, the back of a man who was a complete stranger to her. The game had changed. She had the proof. Now she just had to wait for the right moment to play her hand. But she couldn't shake a terrifying thought. If he was capable of this level of deception, what else was he hiding? with the evidence of the affair. Photographic, digital, and financial piling up. Vivian felt a grim sense of control returning. She and Chloe were building a formidable case. The plan was simple: confront Damien, file for divorce, and use the evidence of infidelity and dissipation of assets to secure a generous settlement that would ensure she and Leo were set for life. It was a painful but straightforward path, or so she thought. The twist came from an unexpected source: Damien's business partner, Nathan Chen. Nathan was a quiet, methodical man, the numbers genius behind the Sterling Holdings throne. He had always been polite, if distant, towards Vivian. One afternoon, he called her directly, his voice strained and urgent. "Vivian, I know this is highly inappropriate, but I need to speak with you. Alone. It's about Damien. It's important." They met at a small, anonymous coffee shop halfway across town. Nathan looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. He fidgeted with his cup, avoiding her gaze. "Nathan." "What's wrong?" Vivian asked, her heart beginning to pound. "I'm breaking a lot of rules by being here." He began, his voice low. "Damien would kill me, but I have a conscience, and I have a daughter. What he's doing, it's not just wrong, it's catastrophic." Vivian braced herself. "You know about Serafina Dubois." Nathan nodded grimly. "It's worse than you think. This isn't just some midlife crisis affair. Serafina isn't just an art dealer. Her father is Lucien Dubois, the head of a rival European conglomerate, Vexillium Group. They've been trying to get a foothold in the US market for years, and Damien has blocked them at every turn." Vivian felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this affair is strategic. At first, I think it was just ego for Damien conquering the daughter of his biggest rival. But it's morphed into something else. They're in business together." He slid a file folder across the table. "Damien is about to close the biggest deal of his career, the North Harbor development. It's a $2 billion project. The city council gave him preliminary approval based on his financial disclosures. But his finances are a house of cards, Vivian." She opened the folder. It was filled with spreadsheets and bank statements that made her head spin. Nathan pointed to a series of transactions. Damien didn't have enough liquid capital to secure the final bond for the project. The banks were getting nervous. So he got creative. He's been systematically devaluing Sterling Holdings' assets on paper-transferring funds through a series of shell corporations. The final destination? He tapped a name on the page. Dubois Holdings, LLC. Vivian's breath hitched. The same company he was sending Serafina $25,000 a month. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Nathan continued, his voice barely a whisper. He's essentially funneling Sterling Holdings' money into her company. She then uses that money to invest back into the North Harbor project as a silent partner, making it look like Damien has secured legitimate foreign investment. It's a massive fraud. He's using your shared marital assets to illegally finance a project with his mistress, who is a front for his biggest competitor. Vivian stared at him, the coffee shop blurring around her. This was so much bigger, so much more sinister than infidelity. But why, she managed to ask. Why would he do that? Why would he involve her? Because he's planning to leave Nathan, said finally, meeting her eyes. The pity in them was like a physical blow. Once the North Harbor deal is finalized and the first phase of construction is paid for, the money will be tied up in the new entity co-owned by him and Serafina. He's planning to dissolve his majority stake in Sterling Holdings, declare it near bankrupt from all the asset transfers, and start a new company in Europe with Serafina and all the North Harbour money. He's not just leaving you. He's planning on leaving you with the smouldering ruins of his company and a mountain of debt. He's trying to leave you with absolutely nothing. The air left Vivian's lungs. It was a betrayal on a scale she could never have imagined. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was methodically erasing her from his life, financially and personally. He was stealing their past, their present, and her son's future. The penthouse, the cars, the savings, it was all a mirage. The money was already gone, siphoned away to build a new life with another woman. The beautiful architect who had fallen for a charismatic visionary now saw the truth. She hadn't married a builder. She had married a demolitions expert. And she and her son were standing at ground zero. She closed the folder, her hands steady. The shock was so profound, it had bypassed tears and gone straight to ice. The little game of catching a cheating husband was over. This was war. A war for her survival, for her son's birthright, and for every penny that this man was trying to steal from them. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You have no idea what you've just done." He gave her a weak, sad smile. "Just be careful, Vivian. He's more ruthless than you can imagine. When a man is willing to burn down his own empire, he won't hesitate to destroy anyone standing in the ashes." Vivian walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun. But everything looked dark. Damien wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal. And he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman he was trying to destroy. The revelations from Nathan Chen shifted the ground beneath Vivian's feet. The personal betrayal, as deep and painful as it was now eclipsed by a clear and present danger. This was no longer a divorce strategy. It was a rescue mission. She met Chloe that same evening, spreading Nathan's documents across the dining room table, a table Damien had once proudly declared was carved from a single slab of Italian marble. Now it felt like a slab in a morgue, where they were performing an autopsy on her marriage and his company. Chloe's legal mind went into overdrive. Her eyes, sharp and focused, darted across the spreadsheets and bank statements. She let out a low whistle. "Oh, Damien," she murmured, "you are in so much more trouble than you know." She looked at Vivian, her expression a mixture of fury and admiration. Most people would crumble, Izzy. "You're building." "I'm an architect, Chloe." Vivian replied, her voice steely. "I know how to read a blueprint. And this is the blueprint of a crime. He thinks I'm at home, drowning in diapers and sorrow. He has no idea I'm about to become the biggest structural problem his new life has." The plan had to change. A simple divorce filing was no longer enough. If they filed now, Damien would accelerate his plans, move the rest of the money, and disappear, leaving them to fight over the scraps of a bankrupt company. "We need to be smarter," Chloe declared, pacing the length of the vast living room. "We can't just sue for divorce. We need to stop the North Harbour deal from closing. We need to freeze his assets before he can move another dime. We're moving beyond family law, Izzy. This is corporate fraud. We need a different kind of weapon." Chloe brought in a forensic accountant, a man named Mr. Davies, whose mild, bespectacled appearance belied a mind like a steel trap. For the next 2 weeks, Vivian's life became a clandestine operation. By day, she was the perfect, unassuming wife, playing her part with an Oscar-worthy performance. She'd pack Damien's briefcase for his important meetings, all the while knowing he was meeting with lawyers, to finalize the fraudulent deal with Serafina. She'd smile and kiss him goodbye, the taste of betrayal bitter in her mouth, her mind racing with the details she and her team were uncovering. At night, after Damien had retired to his guest room, Sanctuary, Vivian's real work began. With Mr. Davies on a secure video call and Chloe in her kitchen, they dove into the digital labyrinth of Damien's empire. Using the information Nathan had provided as a key, they unlocked a hidden world of deception. They traced the money through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Panama, back to accounts controlled by Vexillium Group, and ultimately to Serafina Dubois. Mr. Davies discovered the smoking gun, a draft of the final North Harbor partnership agreement on Damien's cloud server, which he had foolishly synced to the family computer. It detailed the exact structure of the new European company he and Serafina were forming. It even laid out a contingency plan for the dissolution of Sterling Holdings and a proposed spousal settlement for Vivian that was a pittance, a calculated insult designed to leave her financially crippled. Reading the cold, legalistic words that planned her ruin was the final piece of her emotional armor clicking into place. The love she had felt for him curdled into something cold, hard, and pragmatic. He had made this a business transaction, and she was about to become the most ruthless negotiator he had ever faced. The most difficult part was the waiting. The final city council vote to approve the North Harbor project was scheduled in 1 week. That was Damien's finish line. Once that vote passed, the first massive payment from the city would be released, and the money would vanish into the black hole of his new European venture. "We have to move before the vote," Chloe insisted. "We'll file an emergency injunction, a temporary restraining order, freezing all personal and corporate assets of both Damien Sterling and Sterling Holdings, pending a fraud investigation. We'll attach every piece of evidence we have. The bank transfers the partnership agreement, Frank's photos, Nathan's testimony. We'll alert the district attorney's office and the SEC. We're not just going to divorce him, Izzy. We're going to detonate his entire world." The day before the vote, Vivian walked through the penthouse, a ghost in her own home. She looked at the nursery at Leo, sleeping peacefully in his crib, innocent of the storm that was about to break. A fierce, protective love washed over her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him. That afternoon, Damien was in a jubilant mood. He came home early, a rare occurrence. He was practically vibrating with energy. "Big day tomorrow, Izzy," he said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. A toast to the future. Vivian took the glass, her hand steady. She looked him directly in the eye, a faint cryptic smile on her lips. To the future, she echoed, her voice smooth as silk. "May everyone get exactly what they deserve." He clinked his glass against hers, oblivious. He didn't see the iron resolve in her eyes. He didn't see the architect of his downfall standing before him. He just saw his quiet, docile wife, the something at home he had to manage. He had no idea that the foundations of his empire were already gone, and that she was the one holding the detonator. The countdown had begun. The morning of the city council vote dawned bright and clear. For Damien Sterling, it was supposed to be the single greatest day of his professional life. The culmination of years of planning, scheming, and ruthless ambition. The North Harbor project would cement his legacy as a titan of industry. He left the penthouse in a cloud of expensive cologne and smug satisfaction, giving Vivian a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "Wish me luck," he said. "Not that I'll need it. Today is a formality." "I'm sure it is." Vivian replied, her voice unnervingly calm. She held Leo in her arms, her shield and her inspiration. I have a few formalities of my own to attend to today. He barely heard her, already on his phone, barking orders at an underling. The moment the front door closed, Vivian's team sprang into action. Chloe was already at the courthouse, filing the emergency injunction. Mr. Davies was on a secure line with the SEC Enforcement Division, walking them through the fraudulent asset transfers. Frank, the private investigator, was delivering a package of evidence to the district attorney's white-collar crime unit. And Nathan Chen was waiting in a conference room, with his lawyer ready to give his official statement as a whistleblower. Vivian's role was the final, most crucial piece of the puzzle. It was a move Chloe had called dramatically effective. At 10:00 a.m., the city council meeting was called to order. The chamber was packed with journalists, city officials, and investors. Damian Sterling sat at the front table, the picture of confidence flanked by his lawyers. Serafina Dubois was seated in the second row, a vision in a blood-red power suit, her expression cool and triumphant. They exchanged a subtle, victorious glance. The council chairman began the proceedings. We are here today for the final vote on the North Harbor Development Project, presented by Sterling Holdings. Just as he was about to continue, the main doors of the chamber swung open. A uniformed court process server walked briskly down the aisle. He stopped directly in front of the presenter's table. Damian Sterling, he asked, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. Damian looked up, his confident smile faltering into a look of pure confusion. Yes. The server placed a thick stack of documents directly in front of him. You've been served. Cameras flashed. A confused murmur rippled through the chamber. Damian stared at the papers, his face draining of color. The top sheet was a temporary restraining order signed by a judge just 30 minutes prior. In bold letters, it stated that all assets, personal and corporate, of Damian Sterling and Sterling Holdings were hereby frozen. His head snapped up, his eyes frantically scanning the room. And then he saw her. Vivian was standing in the doorway she had just entered. She was not the tired postpartum wife in a messy bun and sweats. She was the architect. She was dressed in a sleek charcoal grey suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She held Leo on her hip not as a burden, but as a symbol of what she was fighting for. Her expression was not one of tears or anger. It was one of absolute, chilling calm. Their eyes locked across the crowded room. In that single, silent moment, Damian understood everything. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a business rival. This was his wife. The woman he had dismissed, deceived, and discarded. Panic, raw and undisguised, flashed across his face. He looked over at Serafina. Her mask of cool composure had shattered. She was staring at Vivian with a look of stunned disbelief, then at the legal documents on Damian's table with dawning horror. Her investment, her new life, was turning to smoke before her very eyes. The council chairman, utterly bewildered, banged his gavel. Order. What is the meaning of this? Chloe Martinez, looking every bit the legal powerhouse, she was stepped forward from the side of the room. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. My name is Chloe Martinez. I represent Mrs. Vivian Sterling. The documents served to Mr. Sterling detail a massive ongoing financial fraud scheme directly related to the financing of the North Harbor project. We have provided evidence to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office that Sterling Holdings is functionally insolvent and that its assets have been illegally funneled into shell corporations. We respectfully request that this vote be postponed indefinitely, pending a full criminal investigation." The room erupted. Reporters scrambled, shouting questions. Damien's lawyers were on their feet, objecting uselessly. Damien himself was frozen, his face a mask of utter ruin. He looked from the legal papers to Serafina, and back to Vivian. Serafina, ever the pragmatist, saw the ship was sinking. She rose silently from her seat, and with one last venomous glare at Damien, she turned and slipped out a side door, abandoning him without a second thought. His last lifeline was gone. Vivian held his gaze for a moment longer. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said it all. "You thought I was part of the foundation of your new life?" her eyes seemed to say. "But you forgot. I'm the one who knows how to bring buildings down." With a quiet dignity, she turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the wreckage of her husband's life. The sound of the chairman's gavel banging for order was the closing punctuation on her old life and the starting gun for her new one. The detonation was complete. Now it was time to rebuild from the ashes. 1 year later, the air tasted different. It no longer carried the metallic, sterile tang of the city, a scent Vivian had come to associate with high-altitude ambition and low-level deceit. Instead, it was filled with the briny, life-affirming fragrance of the sea. The constant, distant roar of traffic had been replaced by the rhythmic sigh of waves against sand and the cheerful cry of gulls overhead. Everything, it seemed, was breathing again. The months immediately following the chaotic city council meeting had been a maelstrom. The name Damien Sterling became a permanent fixture in the headlines, a spectacular cautionary tale of corporate hubris. Vivian had watched from a distance as the legal system, a slow but powerful grinding machine, dismantled her husband's empire and his life. She attended the necessary court proceedings, a silent, dignified presence in the back of the room, listening as lawyers and prosecutors laid bare the intricate web of lies he had spun. Seeing Damien in the defendant's box was a surreal experience. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting courtroom attire. The confident swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a shrunken, hollowed-out man whose eyes were a mixture of disbelief and pathetic self-pity. He had tried to reach out to her through his lawyers, sending messages, pleading for a letter of support for a statement about his good character. Vivian had instructed Chloe to return them all unopened. His character had been revealed not in a courtroom, but in an empty chair in a delivery room. The final sentencing was a day of quiet finality. 10 years in a federal prison. As the judge's gavel fell, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. Vivian felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, not even the bitter satisfaction of revenge. It was simply the closing of a book, the final logical consequence of a story he had authored himself. She walked out of the courthouse, shielding her face from the flashbulbs of the press, her only thought on getting home to her son. Serafina Dubois had vanished as if she were a mirage. Interpol had issued a notice, but her family's wealth and influence had spirited her away, likely to a non-extradition country where she could live out her days in luxurious exile. Vivian rarely thought of her. Serafina wasn't the cause of the rot. She was merely a symptom of it. The disease had been in Damien's soul all along. With the legal battles concluded, Vivian executed her own blueprint for escape. The court, guided by Chloe's fierce and meticulous advocacy, had untangled the mess of Damien's finances. After the government and creditors took their share, what was left of the untainted marital assets was awarded to Vivian. It was not the fortune of a millionaire's wife, but it was more than enough. It was freedom. It was a fresh start. She sold the penthouse and everything in it. refusing to take a single piece of furniture, a single piece of art from that cold, glass-walled mausoleum. She packed only her clothes, Leo's belongings, and a long-forgotten cardboard tube that had been stored in the back of a closet. She moved back to Seaside, the quiet coastal town where she had grown up, a place of weathered, cedar-shingled houses and lifelong friendships. She bought a modest but charming craftsman-style house on a street lined with old oak trees. It had a wide front porch for sipping coffee, a small, sun-drenched room that she immediately claimed as her studio, and a sprawling, slightly wild backyard perfect for a little boy to explore. After the sterile silence of the penthouse, this house was alive. It creaked and groaned in the wind, its rooms filled with the scent of her mother, Maria's cooking, and the sound of Leo's delighted squeals. It was a home. For the first few months, she did nothing but heal. She walked for miles on the beach, Leo strapped to her chest, the salty wind whipping the tears from her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the fight. She was not mourning the man Damien had become, but the man she had once believed he was. She was grieving the future she had envisioned, the family she had thought she was building. One rainy Tuesday, while Leo was napping, she finally opened the cardboard tube she had saved. She unrolled the contents on her new drafting table. They were her old architectural drawings from before she met Damien. Designs for a sustainable community center, a free clinic, a series of beautiful, affordable family homes. Her dreams rendered in graphite and ink. Her fingers traced the lines, a spark of electricity running up her arm. It felt like coming home to herself. That spark ignited a fire. She started small, establishing a one-woman firm from her sunroom studio. She named it simply Rossi Designs, reclaiming the name that was truly hers. Her first client was her elderly next-door neighbor, who wanted a new deck and a wheelchair-accessible ramp. Vivian poured her heart into the project, creating a design that was not only functional but beautiful, with built-in planters and a pergola for climbing roses. The joy and gratitude on her neighbor's face was more satisfying than any praise Damien had ever given her. Word of her thoughtful, human-centric designs spread through the small town. A commission for a kitchen remodel led to a full house renovation, which led to a contract to design a new wing for the local library. She was not building monuments to ego. She was creating spaces for life. Which brought her to this crisp autumn afternoon. The sun, low and golden, cast long shadows across the bustling construction site. Vivian stood, a white, hard hat perched on her head, a blueprint clutched in her hand, watching as the framework for the new Seaside Community Center rose against the twilight sky. It was her design, the very one she had packed away in that cardboard tube all those years ago, now revised and improved, coming to life in wood and teal. Leo now, a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's dark hair. But her warm, steady eyes was digging happily in a large sandbox nearby. Her mother, Maria, sat on a bench, her knitting needles clicking softly, a serene smile on her face. This was her world now. Not a penthouse overlooking a city of strangers, but an open field surrounded by family building something for her community. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a call from the contractor. Instead, it was a text from an unfamiliar number. Vivian, it's Nathan Chen. I saw in the trade journal that Rossi Designs won the Regional Architecture Award for the Seaside Community Center. Just wanted to say congratulations. No one deserves it more. You built something beautiful out of the rubble. Vivian stared at the message, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. Nathan, the unlikely catalyst, the man whose conscience had given her the weapons she needed to fight back. She typed a simple reply. "Thank you, Nathan. That means a lot." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up. She saw the clean, strong lines of the building taking shape her building. She looked at her son, laughing as he piled sand into a bright red bucket. Her son. Damien had been a builder of towers made of glass and lies on foundations of greed. They were designed to impress, to intimidate, to dominate. But a flawed foundation means the whole structure is compromised, destined to collapse. She, on the other hand, was an architect. She knew that the most important part of any structure was its foundation. Her new life was built on a foundation of integrity, resilience, and a mother's unbreakable love. It was a structure designed not for show, but for shelter. Not for ambition, but for authenticity. It was the most important project she had ever undertaken, and its blueprint was finally beautifully complete. Vivian's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals don't have to be the end of our story. They can be the catalyst for discovering a strength we never knew we had. She walked through fire not to be consumed by it, but to be forged by it. She transformed from a victim of a rich man's greed into the architect of her own destiny, building a life of purpose and love on the ruins of his lies. Her victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in every sunrise she watched with her son, in every blueprint she drew, and in every moment she chose peace over bitterness. What did you think of Vivian's journey? Could you have been as strong and strategic as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.